Welcome to the Nocturnal YouTube channel, home of haunted tales. Tonight's feature is Cairn Manor, and I'm Miles Boothe. I hope you enjoy the story. New York City, 1997. Michael read from the notes he had taken as he described the details of the job. It pays $500 a day for 3 weeks. They'll put you up at the estate, meals are included, and it's all the fresh mountain air you can breathe. This is a no-brainer, Will. I almost wish I could take the job myself. I was skeptical. Tutoring 9 and 10-year-olds? I said. I was hoping for something closer to college level. This isn't exactly a resume builder. Michael smiled. You couldn't be more wrong. It's not always what you do, so much as who you do it for. These are important people, Will. The kind of people you want to know. Play your cards right, and you'll be fast-tracked quicker than any job experience can get you. He knew what he was talking about, and it was a lot of money. All I had to do was babysit for 3 weeks, and I'd have rent covered for the school year, along with the gratitude of some bigwig family. I had to admit, it was better than my usual bartending gig. I nodded. Yeah, okay, sign me up. Michael laughed. I already did. The car will pick you up in a couple of hours. Michael was the academic dean of the English department, where I was a teaching assistant. He knew how much work I'd put into getting where I was, and he was wise in the ways of making connections with the right people. He could have offered the job to anyone, but he'd given it to me. He looked at me. Just make the department proud, Will, and watch your table manners. I hear they have a French chef. I was surprised. They have a what? He motioned me out with a waving hand. Go on, get out of here. You have just enough time to pack and find someone to water your plants. I thanked him and was halfway down the hall when he yelled, Have a great summer, Will! This is the kind of opportunity that can change your life. The Costopolis Manor loomed ahead, a monument to wealth built from stone, glass, and wood. The bulky architecture was reflective of both a missionary and a fortress, perfectly blending with the surrounding grounds that were mostly left wild, forested, and very private. As we pulled up, a delivery truck was leaving, and a small group of people stood beside a medium-sized wooden crate. A tall man had already pried off the lid, and as I watched, he leveraged open one side, spilling rust-colored dirt all over the drive. Inside, a large, primitive-looking pot was half revealed. I stepped out of the car and breathed in the crisp Catskill air, a noticeably different vintage than the stifling Manhattan brand I was used to. Mr. Vale, welcome. A woman walked from the crate and held out her hand. I'm Celine Costopolis. Her dark eyes flickered with nervous energy beneath a crown of raven hair. Thank you, Mrs. Costopolis, I replied. Your home is beautiful. She looked back at the dirt in the driveway and smiled. It used to be, at any rate. Please join me inside while they take care of this mess. In the front hall, her voice echoed slightly off the marble floors. Thank you for agreeing to join us on such short notice. Michael seemed very certain that you are the perfect teacher for us. A hint of pride snuck into my voice as I replied, Thank you, I hope so. Celine guided us through several furnished rooms with antiquities and paintings until we arrived before heavy oak doors, which opened to reveal a library. Shelves towering with books emanated the sense of leather, parchment, and just the right amount of stuffiness. I was in heaven. Ermi, Sophie, this is Mr. Vale, Celine announced. Mr. Vale, Ermi called out with the enthusiasm of a 10-year-old, a blur of energy as he bounced up from a nest of cushions in one corner. His features were a youthful echo of the stern portraits gazing down upon us, yet his eyes held none of the untrusting weight. Are you going to be our new teacher? It looks like I am, I said, offering a smile to match his. Sophie, in stark contrast, remained seated at the mahogany table, her small fingers tracing the intricate carvings along its edge. She lifted her gaze slowly, scrutinizing me with an intelligence beyond her 9 years. She was the image of her mother. "Hello," I ventured calmly. "Hello," she replied, her voice laced with a hesitant brightness. Before we could continue, the measured click of heels on marble came from the hallway, and both children swiveled their heads toward the door. An older woman entered the room, her bearing a testament to grace and authority, eyes flickering over me with discernment that felt like it could unravel secrets I didn't even know I possessed. Celine introduced her mother-in-law as simply Yaya. "Mr. Vale," she intoned, offering a hand, not so much for shaking as for the respectful acknowledgement of her presence. "I am pleased to make your acquaintance." I replied, "The honor is mine," trying to match for formality as best as I could, my voice nervous, as I had no idea what the proper response was. "Your home is amazing." "Thank you," she said, her smile thin, not unkind, but calculated, as if each gesture were carefully placed chess piece. "I trust you will find everything is in order for the education of my grandchildren." I nodded my head. "I'm sure that it is. This library is a scholar's dream." I looked around at the shelves and smiled. She nodded sagely. "Education is the bedrock upon which their futures will be constructed." She cast a meaningful stare toward Ermi and Sophie. "I shall expect progress. Excellence is not just a goal this summer, it is a requirement." Her words hung, weighted with expectation and the unspoken penalties of failing to meet it. As she turned away, I had the feeling that Yaya had just let slip that there was more to the situation than I was aware of. Still, the children were smiling as their grandmother left, and the man that had unboxed the crate in the driveway stepped in with a woman who spoke to Celine. "It looks like another artifact of some sort. I left it in the port for now, but I'll give it a good cleaning before dinner and place it in the library with the others." Celine nodded and introduced Tom and Jen Lewis, the caretakers of the property. Tom stood tall and lanky. His relaxed posture and casual attire spoke of quiet days spent tending to the needs of the vast estate, yet there was a sharpness to his eyes that belied his demeanor. "Mr. Vale," he greeted me, his handshake firm but fleeting. "Welcome to the Costopolis Manor. If there's anything you need, please let me know." "Thank you," I replied, noting a disquiet in his eyes as they swept across the room, lingering on different antiques. Jen, beside him, offered a warmer welcome. Her brown hair was woven into a practical braid, and her average features were animated with a friendliness that seemed genuine despite a subtle undercurrent of curiosity. "Hope you'll be comfortable here, Mr. Vale. The mountains are absolutely beautiful this time of year." I smiled. "I'm looking forward to seeing them, thank you." Celine stepped in there. "Now that introductions have been made, Tom, will you show Mr. Vale to his room?" Tom led the way down the hall, and a short walk later, we stood before two heavy wooden doors that swung open with a well-oiled silence, revealing my quarters for the summer. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting a golden haze over a suite that rivaled any five-star hotel. The walls were lined with mahogany, while a four-poster bed dominated the room, its posts carved in serpentine figures that twisted skyward with an almost lifelike verve. Above the marble fireplace hung a painting of a fox hunt, the swirls, peaks, and valleys of paint plainly visible in the afternoon light. Tom left as soon as I was inside, and I walked across a plush, Aubusson carpet, its intricate patterns and colors making it a work of art in itself. Each piece of furniture, from the claw-footed writing desk to the antique globe, spoke of a family ensconced in wealth. Yet beneath the grandeur lay an undercurrent that teased the edges of my attention. Everything here seemed new. I was no expert, but I had seen my share of libraries and chancellors' offices supplied with antiques. In this house, no rug bore the threadbare trails that generations of footsteps would leave. No leather volume had a spine that was creased or cracked, and the furniture was free of the inevitable scratches and scrapes of years gone by. Perhaps the Kostopoulos family was not old money per se. It made no difference to me, but I had assumed they were when Michael said that they were important, and so now my skepticism was piqued. A knock on the doorframe startled me, and I turned to see Celine. She walked into my quarters, her presence like a sudden gust, carrying an armful of books and papers, her slender fingers white at the knuckles. "Mr. Vale," she said, setting the books down heavily upon the desk. "I trust you have everything that you need." Her eyes darted about, as if seeking confirmation that everything was where it should be. I nodded. I think so, thank you," I replied, noting the crease of concern that furrowed her brow. Is everything all right?" She arranged the materials on the mahogany desk with care, smoothing out a meticulously written and detailed schedule. "It's the children," she began. "Our situation here is unique, and their future schooling depends on the progress that they must make this summer." "Of course," I assured her, perusing the timetable she had crafted. It was partitioned into segments of literature, mathematics, and history. Her voice dropped a pitch. "No, it's more than that." I looked up at her again, and the tightness of worry and strain held her eyes in its grip. "Our family's been through a very difficult time. The children's father, my husband, died a few months ago. He was murdered." I was left standing in shock. "I'm so sorry, I don't know what to say." Celine looked at the forest beyond the windows. "He was with another woman, a mistress, I've since learned. The children don't know about that." She took a breath to collect herself before continuing. "He was involved in a number of things that I didn't know about, both personal and financial. For the children's sake, we've kept as much of it private as we possibly can. But when things began to get ugly in the city, I knew that we couldn't stay without them hearing about it. I withdrew them from school early under the condition that they would make up the time missed over this summer." I stood frozen, completely unsure as to how to respond. She continued. "Ermi, he's bright but restless. He has an insatiable curiosity, one that leads him into every corner of this estate." The way that her hands were clasped together revealed the inner workings of a clock wound too tightly. "You'll have to help him learn to focus." I just nodded in understanding. She continued again. "Sophie is observant, perceptive." A fleeting smile touched Celine's lips. "She watches, listens. She catches things you would not expect a child to notice. You'll need patience with her, Mr. Vale. She's discerning." There was more left unsaid, but she moved on. "I did not speak of any of this to Dean Whitley. He has no idea the circumstances when he recommended you." She looked me into the eye. "It was not my intention to deceive you, Mr. Vale, but the well-being of my children is my first priority, and I could not risk the chance that rumor and gossip might keep you from taking the job. As such, I would like to double the payment I discussed with Dean Whitley for your inconvenience, understanding, and discretion." I was completely speechless, but I tried to gather my wits as best I could. "Thank you, Mrs. Kostopoulos. I will take great care with the children's instruction." She nodded and turned to leave, and then paused. "Dinner will be served at 7. And please call me Celine." Then she turned and walked down the hallway. Candles flickered, and the evening table glowed with warmth. I was seated among people who were strangers to me, but the camaraderie surrounding the Kostopoulos table could have fooled anyone into believing we'd known each other for years. The ring of fine china and crystal provided a delicate symphony, and the laughter that rose was like a soothing balm against the earlier disquiet Celine had shared. Endearing tales about the misadventures of the children kept us entertained in between the dishes served by the orchestrator of our feast, Chef Henri Rochefort. Yaya spoke up after the latest course was served. Chef Henri is truly a virtuoso of flavors. She said this in between taking delicate bites, her praise unmistakable. Oui, Celine agreed. We are lucky to have him for the summer. Then he is off to Los Angeles, where his talents can truly shine. As if on cue, Henri emerged with a confection so exquisitely crafted, it seemed a sin to consume it. His aquiline features remained impassive, but his eyes flickered with pride. He spoke only to Celine and Yaya, a soft stream of French that sounded like whispered secrets, before returning to his sanctuary beyond our view. By the time coffee was served, fatigue crept over me like a stealthy predator. My previous life's plan of bartending away the summer now felt like a distant memory against the surreal opulence surrounding me. Eyelids drooping, I excused myself, retreating to my room. I collapsed into the plush bed. The mattress embraced me, and before I knew it, my consciousness spiraled into the abyss of sleep. The last thing that flitted across my weary mind was the reveal of the murder of Mr. Kostopoulos. Then I was out like a light. A roaring scream tore through the fabric of my dreams, wrenching me from the depths of sleep with the violence of tearing apart wet silk. My eyes snapped open, heart thundering against my ribcage. The room was in complete darkness, with my mind nearly as dim, and for a moment I didn't know where I was. The scream tore through the house again, a guttural, wrathful shriek that seemed to pull at my very soul. It was both beast-like and eerily human. Frozen in terror, the events of the previous day came streaming back through my mind as I strained my ears, trying to determine direction, distance, and meaning. Closer the screams came, down the long hallway and right outside my closed door. The blood-curdling cries were suddenly punctuated by a strange snuffling that sounded raspy, like sandpaper on wood. Instinct screamed at me to move, and I leapt from the sheets to turn the lock on the door. Then, the unthinkable. A slight push pressed against the door I had just locked, as if some nightmare made flesh was testing it. My mind screamed with the urge to flee, but my muscles refused to obey, and I stood there locked, in a primal petrification only inches away from what stood on the other side. Sweat covered my brow, and my breaths were shallow and sharp in the thick silence that followed. For an eternity, nothing happened. No further pressing upon the door, no shattering of wood, just the faintest whisper of movement as the thing, whatever hellish creature it must have been, moved on. Its screams became a distant wail, yet they did not cease, continuing their relentless assault on the night. I listened for the voices of people. They must all have heard this thing, but there was no sound save the unholy shrieking of the thing, and that lasted the rest of the night, until the first rays of dawn began to filter through the curtains. After the screams had been silent for some time, I finally dressed and took the chance to unlock my door. I slowly pulled it open, poking my head out into the hallway. Everything was quiet. Emboldened by the increasing light of day, I made my way back to the dining room, and it was there that I found the others. Celine was in a heated debate with Henri, while Tom and Jen stood to one side, lost in their own harried conversation. Tom spotted me first and called out, "Will, are you all right? We were just about to knock on your door." I nodded in affirmation. "I'm fine. A little freaked out, but okay." I was at a loss for how to phrase my next question and just blurted it out. "What the hell was that thing?" Celine was the first to answer. "We think it was some wild animal that must have wandered in during the day and felt trapped when it couldn't leave after we locked up. Tom reopened some of the doors, and it seems to have left. Still, we need to check every nook and cranny before the children can come out." With that, we split into groups, and a short time later decided that whatever it was, it had indeed wandered out the way that it had come in. Celine called for Yaya, and she arrived with the children as Henri disappeared into the kitchen to make breakfast. The morning was a tired affair. The grand dining room, which had been a bastion of warmth the evening prior, now seemed to hold a chill that no amount of sunlight could dispel. Everyone gathered around the table, their faces etched with fatigue and fear. Henri's hands shook slightly as he served coffee, last night's stoicism all but replaced by this pallid unease. Yaya's voice was barely a murmur. Such a scream like I have never heard, her commanding spirit snuffed out by the nocturnal horror. Tom replied, glancing at the pale face of Ermi and Sophie, who clung to Celine like saplings in a storm. This might sound crazy, but a fox might make a sound like that. I wouldn't be surprised if that's what it was. For the sake of the children, I made no move to correct him, but I was very certain that whatever had been sniffing under my door and pushing against it was far larger than any fox. Judging by the children's expressions, they felt the same way. They needed something more to take their minds off of this. Lessons, I said, my own voice sounding foreign to my ears. It's time to begin our lessons. For the sake of normalcy, I stood and looked for the children to join me. This had the desired effect, and Yaya nodded in approval, rising herself to usher the kids forth. We made our way to the children's study, which is a room full of windows, natural light perfectly accenting the blonde-colored wooden tables and emerald green rug with blue and amber designs. Plumply upholstered chairs and beanbag cushions complemented the arrangement, all having been decorated in a happy but calm style that was perfect for children. Not so much as to be silly, but perfect for learning. In one corner, a large bird cage housed a number of tiny finches. Nearby sat an aquarium with a leopard gecko inside. Everything seemed to be designed to spark the imagination, and that suited our purpose perfectly. We began that way, diving into our first lesson and clinging to routine as a shield against the unknown. We took lunch with Yaya, but Celine was absent, as she was in a meeting with a cadre of what appeared to be lawyers, accountants, or both. Over the brief visit, she made to check on the children before the afternoon lessons began. Her face was a mask of stone. We tried to forget the otherworldly screams, the unsettling sniffling at our thresholds. Yet the truth lurked in the back of our minds, as undeniable as the opulence that surrounded us. Something last night had stalked within the Kostopoulos estate, and none of us had the faintest idea what darkness had come to prowl at our doors. Dinner was a pale repeat of the night before, the dread that consumed everyone at the table palpable. Celine offered that she had spoken to an official at the Department of Wildlife, and that bears were known to be in the area, but he had never heard of one breaking into a person's home before. Tom's theory about it being a fox seemed to be what we were going to go with, but it offered little comfort to the children and less to the adults. Yaya took the children to bed early, and Celine announced that we would do another search of the house as we locked everything down for the night. We agreed that once we were in our rooms, no one should leave them until morning. It seemed odd, almost funny, but there were no winks or nods that I could see. Finally, with our inspection completed, we said our goodnights and turned towards our appointed quarters. It seemed like hours before I fell asleep, but finally I did, entering into a restless world of shadowy forms and haunting images. A terrible scream tore through the night, ripping me from the clutches of my nightmare. For a heart-stopping moment, I couldn't tell where the dream ended and reality began, or which one was worse. The scream echoed again through the halls, a primal wail that curdled my blood. I stumbled out of bed, heart pounding like a caged animal desperate for escape. I fumbled for the light switch, my fingers trembling with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. Another crash reverberated through the house, the sound of shattering glass and splintering wood. It was a cacophony of destruction, of chaos, only to be wrought by something immense and powerful. This beast, whatever it may be, was certainly no fox. I pressed my ear against the door, straining to hear any sign of the others. Were they safe? Had the creature damaged more than furniture? The silence that followed was almost more terrifying than the screams themselves. My heart pounding against my ribcage, a frantic drumbeat that echoed the terror coursing through my veins. I stood frozen, my hands pressing against the door as the creature's ragged cries again filled the air. Each exhalation was a guttural growl, a promise of violence. The breathing drew closer down the hall, and just as happened last night, the thing stopped right outside my door. Claws scraped down the wood, a discordant melody that dropped shivers down my spine. The door suddenly pushed in, harder than last night, wood creaking under the pressure, and for one heart-stopping moment, I was certain it would give way. But the lock held fast. Please, 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 I whispered to myself, please go away. After some time, the thing did move away, the creature's growls fading down the hall. I breathed a shuddering sigh of relief, my knees weak with gratitude. But even as the immediate danger passed, I knew that the ordeal was far from over. This beast was out there, lurking in the hallways, and I was trapped here, a prisoner in this room with no way to escape. Sleep was out of the question. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against my window panes set my nerves on edge. I paced the room like an animal myself, my mind spinning with questions that had no answers. What was this creature and where did it come from? What did it want? And most importantly, how are we going to survive the summer like this? As the first pale rays of dawn began to seep through the curtains, Jen's voice, shrill with panic, came from just outside my door. "Will, are you all right?" "I'm here," I called, my voice hoarse and unsteady. "What's happening?" "I don't know," she replied, her voice punctuated by the sound of hurried footsteps. "Tom's gone to check on the others. Stay here in your room until we know that it's safe, and we'll come back for you." Stay in my room? The thought of remaining confined any longer was unbearable. And yet, what choice did I have? Unarmed and unprepared, I was no match for some clawed beast. My mind raced with scenarios, but nothing made any sense. The moments crawled by as my nerves frayed to the breaking point. I had to calm myself, and finally I did, the terror subsiding enough to let outrage guide me instead. I opened the door and ventured into the hallway, my heart lodged against my throat. The familiar corridors now seemed alien and threatening, shrouded in shadows that danced and writhed like living things. I made my way down the hall, dreading what I might find. The scene that greeted me in the dining room was one of utter devastation. The buffet and china cabinet lay in ruins, their contents scattered across the floor in a glittering sea of broken glass. And there, amidst the wreckage, stood Henri, a double-barreled shotgun clutched in his white-knuckled grip. "Une bête," he murmured, his eyes wild with fear. "A beast!" A beast indeed, but of what origin? The question hung in the air, a palpable presence that seemed to suffocate me. I stood there, frozen in place, as the gravity of our situation sank in. The once grand dining room now resembled a battlefield. Henri's presence offered little comfort, his haunted expression speaking volumes about the horrors he was picturing. "Will, thank God you're all right," Tom said, his voice trembling slightly as he entered the room. "I've checked the house. Whatever it was, it's gone." Jen appeared in the opposite doorway, her face pale and drawn. "Is everybody safe?" she asked, her eyes darting nervously about the room. Tom nodded, his jaw clenched tight. For now, he replied, his words heavy with unspoken implications. Henri murmured in French, his words clipped and urgent. Without waiting for a response, he strode from the room, shotgun held at the ready. My thoughts churned like a tempest, a maelstrom of fear and confusion. What could have done this? What manner of creature would even wreak such destruction only to vanish without a trace? Whatever it was, one thing was clear. We were all in grave danger. As I stood there, surrounded by the shattered remnants of this once civilized room, I had thought to look at this through less civilized eyes. Moments later, I was outside of the home, slowly scanning the ground for signs of a beast, tracks, scrape marks, anything that a thing of that size would inevitably leave behind. I looked around each door, at every gate, and went so far as to check the shrubs and smaller plants to see if anything had been trampled. But my search went in vain, and there was no sign of the things passing. I was out of ideas when Tom walked around the corner. He exhaled. Looks like we had the same idea. Did you find anything? I shook my head. No. You? He paused as his face tightened. Maybe. Come over and have a look at this. I followed him to the far side of the yard and around back, where we stopped before a pile of stones. They had obviously been arranged by a careful hand, larger rocks placed at the bottom and smaller stones stacked on top. It must have been 4 feet high, and it reminded me of a makeshift grave marker. Tom looked at it blankly as he spoke. It's a cairn, a marker of some kind. I looked at it confused. Okay, but what does it have to do with whatever was in the house last night? Tom shook his head. I don't know, but it wasn't here yesterday.